didn't hear in that intro is Agile expert. I'm a novice, I'm a student, I'm still learning, and a lot of what you're going to hear today from me is that journey. I also happen to work for an incredible organization that unknowingly, I think, has adopted some Agile practices into HR unknowingly. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. So I work for Farm Credit Services of America and Frontier Farm Credit. Anyone here in the room know what we do? There's a 4-letter word in our title that probably gives you an idea, right? Farm. So we help finance producers across the country who feed the world. Our mission is to be agriculture's most valued financial partner. So what that might mean to you is, some of you fly coast to coast, you fly over states you've never been. Nebraska might be one, South Dakota might be one. Those are the states we help finance to feed the world. So our mission's important to us, our culture is strong, and we're very focused on our people. A big part of what we do with human resources and the people resources is talk about, think about, work towards performance. How many of you have experienced performance review yourself, individually? Okay, I think we all have. So what are some descriptors that you would use for performance reviews? What has been your experience? Whether you've given them or received them? Dread. Awful. Heavy. Time-consuming. Pointless. Dehumanizing. All positive words, right? And the title of my talk today is Fueling Performance, and you've told me everything that de-energizes people. So we have work to do in this arena. And I'm going to talk to you about our journey, but our journey is far from over. I'm walking away from the last couple of days with a ton of ideas. And we have to always balance that with the realities of what we do. A large part of what I do is risk management for the organization. That's a reality. There's the other things that are important too, but that's part of what my role is. And so we have to keep those things in consideration. How many of you have had performance reviews tied to a compensation or pay increase? Raise your hands. How's that feel? With all the descriptors that we just had, how does that feel to know that that experience is tied to your increase in pay? Unfair. And we have research now, and we have data that says when you're in a feedback situation, the receiver of feedback and the giver of feedback both have an adrenaline increase. And they both go into fight or flight. That's a great experience, isn't it? So we have some work to do. Deloitte Insights Human Capital Trends in 2017 starts edging us towards the idea of where we're headed with performance. Today, as companies operate as a network of teams, careers and learning are strategic, and companies are shifting from jobs to work in their operations. The need to align goals, provide feedback, and coach for performance is real-time, continuous, and multi-directional. Feels very agile to me, based off what I've heard the last couple of days. So we're heading in that direction. Part of the problem I see is, and I'll use agile, but there's other forms of business work that you could compare this to, is it's moving ahead of HR and people. And so if I can encourage you to do anything, is don't wait for HR to get this. You need to bring them along on your journey. Show them the way, encourage them to understand the work that's being done. They will make the connections. But they're not going to come to you and go, okay, this agile thing, now we're in. They're not going to. Rarely. We're getting there. Deloitte Burson has done a lot of work in this area of performance management or continuous performance improvement. Agile goal management, check-ins, and continuous feedback are becoming common. And new models of evaluation and rewards are being adopted next. Notice they say next, because I don't think we're there. I think it was Dan that mentioned this concept of kind of team incentives. We've got some things at Farm Credit that are set up that way, but we've heavily tied performance management to pay. And that in some ways blocks us from really truly the whole point, right, is continuous performance improvement. So what that looks like is moving from a once a year formal annual performance review with a series of rankings and ratings and scores. Moving away from that, moving away from this leader-directed kind of one-size-fits-all feedback based on long cycles, usually an annual cycle that looks backwards. We want to move to a shared, forward-focused process that we're going to talk about today. And in-the-moment feedback, focusing on improving performance in the near future. So I'm going to talk to you about our journey. I added to this slide that our journey was a cross-functional team approach. I think that is really important. What we did and the drastic changes that we made a couple years ago would not have been successful without representation from all over the organization. We needed the buy-in, we needed the input, and we needed champions to go out there and talk through this change. So when I came to Farm Credit, like many other HR leaders, we were kicking the can down the road. Performance evaluations stink, it's miserable, it's stressful. Like a lot of other HR leaders, just kicking the can down the road. And then one day, we decided at Farm Credit, you know what if we just blow it up? What if we just start over? We had a multi-page, competency-based rating system that took leaders hours to complete. And again, as painful as it is for those receiving the performance evaluation, it was equally painful for leaders. If you've done them, you know what I mean. And so the employee would fill out their rating sheet, the leader would fill out their rating sheet, and then they'd go to town telling each other why their ratings weren't right. I rated myself a 5. Oh, okay, well, I've got you at a 2.5, so let's talk about that. That's rich conversation, isn't it? So why change? We talked about the time-consuming nature of this process. We weren't moving the needle on performance. It was pretty static. It was really a compensation function. It was backwards looking. So you might look back 6 months to a year, and it was really not helpful, right? Real-time, in-the-moment conversation and feedback is helpful. Too much emphasis on that rating or the score. Ratings frustrated people, and they were subjective. If any of you have read Marcus Buckingham's latest book, 9 Lies About Work, read it if you haven't. It is fascinating, and he talks specifically about this idea of rating. And essentially, we are best at rating our own experience about anything. We are not accurate or adequate at rating other people's performance. Great book. It was stress-inducing for leaders and employees. It was just a horrible time. And here we should be celebrating successes. We should talk about the future, and it was just this dread. So we got rid of it. We said, we're scrapping it and we're starting over. So as that cross-functional team got together, there were certain guiding principles that we wanted to stay close to and true to. It needed to fit our culture. We are a team-based culture. We are transparent and we are empowering. And I can stand up here and say that we truly are that. So we wanted to stay close to that. We wanted it to be future-focused, flexible. We wanted it to engage the employees and the leaders. It should be an engaging conversation. We want it to elevate performance, right? Strengthen performance. But we want it simple and efficient. There should be objective measures, and it should be a repeatable process. So the features, we started with open and honest two-way communication. This wasn't leader-driven. This was really the responsibility of the teammate. Frequent real-time discussions teammates to own their own development and their own performance, to own the process. And we wanted to include performance goals, but also development goals. So the process started to look like this. Monthly employee check-ins. And when I say check-ins, I'll just emphasize we were very intentional about language here. We wanted leaders to start using the same language so that teammates could understand what part of the process we might be in. So monthly employee check-ins. Twice a year, we have employee GROW one-on-one conversations, and I'll talk a little bit more about what GROW stands for. But that's the more formal kind of process. Discussions focusing primarily on the future again, and we adopted and used the inside-out coaching methodology. What we wanted to do is give leaders tools to have a coaching conversation, not a performance evaluation, and we felt it was important that leaders had those tools so everyone went through that methodology. The check-ins are brief. They can be 10 to 15 minutes. They can be, hey, I'm walking by your cubicle and I'm going to sit down and we're going to have a check-in. It can be that informal or it can be formal. With my team, I've asked them, schedule a check-in. I want a formal time. My team is busy. I'm gone a lot, and I want to make sure that they know that time, when that time is set up. Because one of the things that we got back from teammates is, I don't always know when this is a check-in or when it's just idle conversation. My team, I just felt with my schedule, I wanted scheduled time, and I let it be up to them. I have some teammates, they want an hour of my time a month. That's great. I have some teammates that barely want 15 minutes of my time. That's great too. As long as we get to the nature of the conversation, I really want to adapt what works for them. They're informal, but they're meaningful. They're not documented. We got rid of most of our documentation. I know for you HR people in the room, that's uncomfortable. But we are continuing to move down that path and here's why. This is at least what I tell our legal counsel. We have all of this documentation on performance evaluations. We have all these ratings and all these notes, right? And most of it's the same, it sounds the same, it looks the same, and it's all relatively positive. I have backlogs of this. And the reason is we gotta document. But then when something happens and I have a problem and I have a leader who wants to let go of an employee, well, I've got all of this documentation that kind of supports positivity. That doesn't help me. That doesn't build my case. So I tend to be, and this is my own philosophy, document by exception. The way that this works is when we have a really strong progressive discipline process. And what I mean by that is we're going to assume everyone is at least meeting expectations in performance, and we don't need to document that. But once those expectations or their performance falls below, we need a really solid, strong process for that leaders need to follow, and they need to feel supported by their HR generalists. As long as we have that in place, I feel comfortable with ditching these piles and piles of just pointless documentation. At least that's where we're headed. We'll see. We're in continued negotiations with that. We have dispersed teams, so these check-ins do not have to be face-to-face. They can be on the phone. They can be over Zoom. Again, it's really up to the leader and the teammate. These are to complement the GROW one-on-one conversations that happen twice a year. They should really build up to those conversations. We started sharing with leaders just 3 quick questions that you can ask. Don't make it complicated. Have a conversation. What's working? Where are you getting stuck? And what might you do differently? So it's that move forward. The other question that I encourage leaders to ask is, how can I help? Engage yourself in the conversation. We keep it simple, keep it flexible. Then we move to the GROW one-on-one conversations. Those are twice a year. They're scheduled for 30 minutes or more. They're focused on goals, progress. Again, that should be part of the check-ins, but this is where there's a more formal conversation about what have you accomplished. The Grow One-on-One model is based off of Alan Fine's Inside Out Coaching and some things that he's done. Are any of you familiar with Alan Fine? Okay, so Alan Fine started as a tennis coach. And if any of you have read Tim Galway's, I'm not going to remember the, oh shoot, it'll come back to me. Anyway, it's a tennis book, right, about the art of tennis. So Alan Fine took this concept, and in a video that we saw in Inside Out Coaching, he's coaching a tennis player that is working on his backhand. And so what Alan does is he says, well, okay, so show me a few of your backhand moves. And then as he's showing him, when he hits one right, he says, how did that feel? What did you do differently there? And the protege would say, well, my foot was in a different place, or I felt the handle was different. Okay, keep going. Okay, that was a really good one. What was different there about, where were your eyes? So he's focusing on what's going well and what he's doing right, not how to fix problems. And I really love that philosophy, and that's the Grow One-on-One model that we use. It's about goals. It's about reality. Where are you? What are your options? O. And what is the way forward? So that's the Grow model that we use. Here it is. Alan said the biggest obstacle in performance isn't knowing what to do, it's doing what you already know. So in a coaching conversation, we really want to focus on reality. What's working well? Where do you need to improve? What are your options to improve? And then what's your way forward? Kind of what's that commitment moving forward? And this is the actual model that we use. Now, one area that we didn't, I talked to you earlier about negotiations. There was one non-negotiable in our changes. We still had to have a rating. We weren't comfortable giving up the rating. So here's what we negotiated, and here's where we landed. Leaders still do a calibration process. They answer 4 questions and with an optional 5th. Those questions do lead to a rating, okay? But that is not shared with the teammate. That is for behind the scenes. So we did go from a situation where employees got a score every year, and that was like 1 to 5. So everybody was, wanting to be a 4-point something. We got rid of that. We took that out of the equation, and then it wasn't part of the conversation. We weren't ultimately comfortable with getting rid of that, so the rating is behind the scenes, and it still is part of our merit process. The 5 questions are this, and this is straight out of Deloitte's work, if any of you are familiar with Deloitte's work. These are statements that are answered by the leader for each teammate. This teammate's performance exceeds my expectations. This teammate's focus on development exceeds my development. Okay, sorry, I read that wrong. Exceeds my expectations. This teammate fully exemplifies our team principles and we are statement performance expectations. So culturally, we have team principles and we are statements, and that is now a big part of everyone's performance evaluation. Our we are statements go as such. We are innovators, we are experts, we are servants, we are teammates, we are leaders. So those are built into our process now, and which is the we are statements are crucial to our culture. We focus on them a lot. We talk about them in every meeting I'm in. And we really focus those because we feel that's a big part of our culture, and we want to make sure that we continue to embed that. I would always want her or him on my team. Now, what do you notice about these 4 statements? Positive wording. Strongly positive, right? I mean, I would always want her or him on my team. Always. That's pretty powerful. The statement alone, and then we ask leaders to rate them. So I will say in our version 3, these statements truly probably aren't getting us to where we want to be. And what the feedback we're hearing from leaders is they're so strongly stated anyway that they're kind of polarizing to maybe the upper echelon. And we're just not sure that we've got it perfect in terms of what essence we want leaders to focus on. We want them to focus on performance. We absolutely expect them to focus on team, being a strong teammate. And part of that is in our principles and our we are statements. And we want teammates to focus on their development. So I think version 3 of this is going to take those important elements, and we may need to tweak these statements a little bit. The 5th one, this team member is at risk for low performance. This is simply a yes or no question. And if it's answered yes, then we know we probably have to visit with that leader, and there should either be a performance improvement process in place or something. Some action should be taken on that. So it's really more of an indicator for us in HR to know, okay, someone is at risk at low performance, hence that's where we move to a more progressive kind of documentation and plan. So the team principles and the we are statements, they're behavioral expectations that align with our culture, very strongly align. Our teammates understand and relate to these principles because we talk about them all the time. They're living and breathing in our organization. We took these and embedded them in our process, and we took out competencies. We used to have pages of competencies that leaders needed to rate, and that just got tiring, and it's really difficult, right, to differentiate. If this team member is at risk for low performance, we ask for documentation, and the system informs the generalist, which will then have a conversation with the leader. And if there is an activity started, we'll certainly begin that process. Development plans and goal setting are very important and a part of each conversation, or should be, and part of that evaluation. They're required. At least one goal must be developmental. So we want to make sure that we have that focus not only on performance and productivity, but we have that, what are you doing to grow? What do you want to do? What's your momentum? And how do we measure that? It is a critical part of our discussion. We didn't want to overlook the importance of recognition in performance management. We recently, in the last 8 months, rolled out a new recognition system called Bravo, and we implemented that using Global Force. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that. But the whole part of that is to recognize performance, again, real time, and allow employees and leaders to recognize. So anyone in the organization can give a bravo to anyone else. It's been very positive. It keeps us focused on celebrating team accomplishments and milestones year-round, not just at evaluation time. The leader's role in this and the success of this was first to understand the changes and the why. Why were we moving so far off of a traditional performance evaluation? Well, part of that was we got feedback from them. And the feedback overwhelming was, it's just not working. It's the objectives that we've set are not being met. The check-ins and the snapshots, that language got confusing, so we changed that. But we wanted them to use the language. So the snapshot today is the 5-question rating. The check-ins are monthly, and then we change the verbiage to say grow one-on-one conversation. That's the twice-a-year conversation. Leaders need to embrace the inside-out coaching model. Everyone went through training, and we continue to emphasize open, honest, two-way communication. So employees have a prep guide, leaders have a prep guide, and the intention is for them to come prepared to talk about what's going on and what's top of mind for them. As we rolled this out, here were the things in our mind that worried us. This requires trust in the leader and the entire process. It requires leaders to let teammates know where they stand. And that can be the most difficult part, right, of these conversations, is really giving feedback. It's sometimes not always the most positive, but it can be helpful. And that is the focus of these conversations, is helpful feedback. Teammates literally don't see anything. They don't get an evaluation form. They don't see a rating score. It's all conversation. So we take out that noise of what's my raise going to be. And we're going to continue to work on some of that separation. Because the more I'm into this process, the more I see when you tie up performance management to pay, it gets real sticky and difficult to really have those conversations without an end in mind. So we will continue to work on that. Today, performance evaluations and compensation, at least from a timeline perspective, are tied together. We're a very analytical financial services company, and we were worried that our analytical teammates might need numbers and ratings. We really were worried that they would want something tangible. We were delighted to know they just really didn't ask about it. And further follow-up said, no, I don't need it. We assumed they would. They don't. The other thing is, what issues will arise that we haven't thought about? We got good feedback, input, we had a cross-functional team, but there are always those things that you don't really think about. And I will tell you, for the most part, they were minor. Language was important. Leaders and teammates were confused at first about what's a snapshot, what's a check-in, what are we doing? So we just clarified that as well. The other thing that we didn't do out of the gate is we didn't provide the teammates a guide. We gave the leaders a guide, and what the leaders were doing is they were copying it and giving it to the teammate, and then they were having a conversation. That was fine, but we really wanted them to have a little bit different focus, so we created an employee guide, and that was helpful for the conversations. So 2 years later, what we've learned, our feedback survey confirmed for leaders, they were bought in. 74% said this process is better. On the employee side, 44% believed the process was better. 43% thought it was about the same. So still some work to do there, but that's still overwhelmingly at least the same and better, and we'll continue to work on that. The improvements we made, I mentioned to you, we needed to eliminate confusion on wording. We created an even better inside-out kind of coaching conversation guide, and we communicated an even stronger emphasis on goals because that was kind of getting overlooked and missed in some of the conversations. Leaders saved thousands of hours. We did the math, and it was ridiculous the time that they were putting in for these evaluations. We have a highly, highly engaged workforce, and that remains strong. We have strong performance that equates to high profitability, and we're effectively meeting our goals, which is part of our incentive plan, which plays in to team incentives. So we have individual performance, and we have a team incentive, which is strictly based on organizational outcomes. So wherever you are on this journey, here are some ideas that I would offer for you. Here are some places to start. Identify a strategy and philosophy of performance management. Make sure that it locks in with your current culture and organization. There's a lot of great information out there, but it's also got to be able to fit where you are today. And just like us, this is an evolution. We're looking at version 3 now. We're going to start work on version 3 of this, and I think it's going to be very different. We've learned a lot of things. Look to your peers and see what is working. Ask them, where are they at? What are they doing? Tailor your performance management to strategic and organizational needs. The core principles of check-ins, agile goal setting, frequent feedback are becoming common. But some companies are not there yet. They're not comfortable with that. You all have a part in helping your organizations get there. I understand the comfort level being in HR. I also understand the reality of let's do something that makes sense and something that's beneficial to everyone. There's a way to get there. It may not be, a lot of your companies may not be comfortable like we were with just, we just trashed the whole system. We just said, we're done, we're starting over. That may not be realistic, and that's okay. Take your time, but start engaging those people and make sure that they're moving forward. The essence of performance management is open, honest, two-way communication. And that's what we feel we are starting to create. It's about past performance, but certainly it's absolutely about future expectations. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Katie.